In this regard, unfortunately, we know that accelerators, which have been the most popular focus of cities throughout the world for the last 10 or 15 years, we know that they tend not to actually be delivering the results that we're looking for. And
Yeah,
so most of what I publish and look into is why that's the case, where that's the case, and what we can do about it to change things.
guess that this is the pivotal moment where we turn the page and we start the discussion about the venture studio, because what is emerging are these limits, intrinsic limits of how the accelerator incubators they behave so far. Something that we understood we can change, they can change, but the future, I totally agree with you. In my opinion, is on the shoulder of the venture studio. And for me, the venture studio is a kind of ecosystem.
I don't think you're wrong, but I would challenge you a little bit only to help your audience and everyone paying attention appreciate really where we started the conversation, which is that you must follow trends. You must study the market. The startups that fail and the accelerators that fail are the ones that are doing what they want to because they think so. And they read lean startup. And so they believe that if they build an MVP first, because that's my solution to this problem in the market, and then if I just prove that I can get some customers, I have a successful startup. And that's absolutely not true. Absolutely not correct. That the market is what is determining how things change and what will or will not work.
Hello, digital warriors, and welcome back to the Forge of the Unicorns podcast. Today we have a special guest, a guy that comes directly from the venture capital and is a veteran of it. Paul O'Brien. Paul, it's a pleasure to have you here.
It's a great pleasure, Michele. How are you?
Good, thank you for asking. I'm super excited of today's discussion because I am intrigued with your publications. I am intrigued with your last article about the venture studio, how the accelerator are creating some kind of stuff that we will discuss in the podcast. But before putting the coach in front of the horses, I would like that you present yourself to the audience because you are pretty an eminence on venture capital.
Thank you. Great to be here. My latest article, by the way, is actually about raising capital. And so
Yeah.
take a peek at that. I'm on Substack, I'm on LinkedIn, and I'm on Medium as well, if you all prefer that. My name is Paul O'Brien. I think of me as having two distinct roles. Number one, I'm an economist for the startup ecosystem. I do a lot of research about different countries and regions of the world, and I try to help with policy and regulatory matters that pertain to how governments and companies in the local economy can better help entrepreneurs. I do that through what's called the Startup Economist. I'm also the head of public affairs for Founder Institute. Founder Institute is the largest seed stage incubator in the world. We operate in about 270, 280 different cities. And in that regard, we develop infrastructure and a platform for operating programs. And we run a curriculum that helps develop people into entrepreneurs and develop ideas into enduring companies.
And what you are doing is something that I'm following pretty close since long time ago.
Thank you. Thank you.
I read a lot of your articles, and indeed, when you were discussing about the venture studio, the article was echoing in my head with what we have developed, the model starting from the experience that we had in F1 20 years ago almost, the unicorns ecosystem. Because in your analysis, there were a lot of connection with the behavioral model that we see why a lot of organizations are not able to reach a elite status. They stop in a sort of plateau. And this was the way how you amaze me, because your articles are always full of data that you get with your companies. For me, as an engineer, the data is something that is the most precious stuff when we are doing analysis. And so today we are in the AI age. And I guess that both of us, we have a lot of data. And also, we come from two different geographical locations. You are in US, and from my spaghetti English, I scream that I am from Europe, where culture and...
Your English is better than anything else I could speak, so I appreciate it.
You're making me blush. For sure, what we have is a different landscape of regulation, especially in investment between US and Europe. That is something that I would love to investigate further with you because you are an expert on the matter. Also, in the discussion, I would love to understand what AI is creating into the venture capital environment, because it seems that AI is creating a black hole that is sucking all the capital lately. And last, but this is the main topic of the discussion, I would really love to understand this new idea of the venture studio, how we can help entrepreneurs to develop their curriculum, their ideas in a parallel track side where we help them to understand from an idea how to find the market fit and the right product, but also how to create a company that is sustainable, that doesn't need a lot of capital because how they run it is bleeding a lot of money. This is today discussion in a nutshell. Let's say. Where shall we
Good, I like
start,
it.
Paul?
I like it. I might frame our first conversation around data, but even remove the word data because I find that it's a term that scares most people, or it prevents most people from looking at the information and the research that exists about the work that we both do, because data feels like it's a term meant for the analysts and the engineers. It's the technical side of information, and that's the real problem. That's why and where most of my work into different regions is meaningful, but it's also why I've started to publish quite a bit more about the impact of accelerators and the possibility, the opportunity in venture studios. And it's that if we take a step back from the idea of data and just think of it as what we know, the fact is when it comes to entrepreneurship and innovation, when it comes to understanding how startups work and how to make them more successful, there's actually a tremendous amount of research. We know we know what kinds of people, we know what types of personalities are more likely to be successful, begging the question why we aren't illuminating that more and why we aren't requiring that in startup teams. We know a lot about what priorities in a company, what priorities in a startup are more important. We know with a tremendous depth of research the fact that marketing is a skill set, or marketing as a technique, not necessarily a role. Not that you need to have a chief marketing officer or hire an agency in your startup, but that you have to study the market and understand the market and follow trends. We know that that's probably the single most important thing in a startup, besides the fact that the team is what determines whether it's going to succeed or fail. And in this regard, unfortunately, we know that accelerators, which have been the most popular focus of cities throughout the world for the last 10 or 15 years, we know that they tend not to actually be delivering the results that we're looking for. And
Yeah,
so most of what I publish and look into is why that's the case, where that's the case, and what we can do about it to change things.
yes. And what I observe, so let's remove data from the picture. My observation as a normal human being, what I have observed lately is that a lot of these companies that goes through incubator, accelerator, or even through digital transformation, they have a social behavioral tendency to apply a process by the book. They are not able to evolve the idea, the recipe, to a taste that fits their culture and their own unicity. And this is something that is intriguing for me, because this showcases that our industry is so in an evolutionary stage due to the technology disruption that probably what was working yesterday is not working anymore tomorrow. And so this kind of accelerator, even the university, if you think about what happened in the last 3 years with AI, they are not equipped to provide software engineers that they are properly skilled with AI. So is for you the speed of technology disruption one of the factors that probably is the leading cause of inefficiency of these kind of accelerators, incubator, or digital transformation playbooks?
Yeah, great question. Is the pace of innovation and disruption a cause of the challenges in incubators and accelerators? I think I think it's fair to say that it's a factor, but not the cause. And what I mean by that is innovation. We could argue that innovation is accelerating and it's moving more quickly. It's changing things more quickly. But the more fundamental challenge or fact of the matter is that most incubators and accelerators throughout the world struggle because the people involved are not oriented to the way that startups work. Interestingly, the same reason that most accelerators fail is what we find as the reason for why startups fail. Number one, the wrong people. And
Mhm.
number two, not doing marketing to understand what's going on. And so let's clarify that in the context of, say, an accelerator. Most accelerators we find are operated by former business professionals. They're operated by people who want to be investors, or they're operated by some sort of government funding and government oriented expectations or professionals. Those people simply don't have the same, not skills, but the same personality and tendency that you find in an entrepreneur. And the best way that we can illuminate that, Michele, is that you're right. We find that most incubators and accelerators are trying to put in place a plan or some sort of structure that defines and dictates how the startups are going to operate within there. And the reality of
Mhm.
entrepreneurship and startups is that a plan needs to be thrown out the window almost immediately. It needs to be
Mm.
discarded almost immediately. And the reason for that is the second point. The reason for that is, let's touch on AI for just a second in this regard, rather than the other topic you want to cover. In this regard, imagine that you had a startup or you were operating an accelerator 24 months ago, 2 years ago. If you were not studying the trends, if you were not paying attention to what was going on in your sector, if you were not aware of the fact that Microsoft was developing something called ChatGPT or OpenAI, you would
Mhm.
have neglected the fact that 6 months later, or roughly a year ago, AI would begin to change everything, just as the internet itself did 20,
Yes.
25 years ago. That change is innovation. But the mistake that's made is that most startups, most founders, and most professionals running programs think that or expect that they will adopt innovation as it changes their sector, as it comes to bear, as it becomes available to what they're doing. An accelerator will wait for AI to be meaningful or for there to be a solution for accelerators. And the mistake in that, or the problem in that, is the fact that everyone in innovation needs to be aware of the implications, needs to be aware that this is happening. And so if you're not at the leading edge, if you're not familiar with it and adopting it as much as possible and using it as much as possible, you're leaving the entrepreneurs in your program to fall behind because then they're not able to depend on you and look to you to adopt that technology as well. I touched on it very briefly, and then I'll let you share a different thought. I touched on it very briefly in the sense that you can also think of the impact of AI as the impact that we had 25 years ago with the internet. If you were an entrepreneur building a retail store 30 years ago and you wanted to sell things through message boards and bulletin boards and the version of the internet that we had back then, and you weren't paying attention to this thing called Amazon, or you weren't paying
Mhm.
attention to this thing called WordPress or Shopify or some sort of store or e-commerce infrastructure, obviously your venture would fail. And it would fail because of what the market is doing and the changes in the market that present an opportunity if you take advantage of it, but cause your failure if you're not aware of it and paying attention and using it.
Yes. And I love what you are bringing to the light because it's recalling me one of my preferred book, that is The Anticipatory Organization from Daniel Burrus. And I love that book because it contains something that for me is a mantra since I was a kid. I grew up in a basement where my dad was full of radio equipment because he was in the civil protection, and so he was always listening to the radio. And the radio were everything for him. Antennas everywhere, cables were wiring all around the basement and outside in the roof. The people were looking at us like, guys, you are a thunderstorm master with all these iron poles on the roof. And indeed, my dad was really a guy that was all in technology. I started with a very old Commodore 64 when I was roughly 6 years old. And then I saw the technology evolving until today that you can speak with whatever device and they start to talk back with you. This disruption is something that is, I want to say, for us, because we grew up in an environment where we were kids, that we still were playing outside on the street. And so for our generation, and I'm 50 plus, as you see from my beautiful white beard, we got the shock from analog to digital. And the stuff that you were discussing before, to me, are very connected with one concept that is the behavioral engineering. That is the concept of the outcome of your action are defining your future. And so a lot of these incubators, what they miss is the connection between the trends and the outcome that they will produce. And I see this failure, if we want to change a bit topic to something that is maybe more familiar to leaders out there, with digital transformation, especially with the failure of the 20 years that we had since the Agile Manifesto with the Agile transformation. That a lot of organizations embrace this Agile Manifesto blindly, putting on the wall certificates that they got the Scrum Master and the Product Owner and they were Agile leaders. But did they change their behavior to obtain a different outcome? Or did they simply put a canvas on top of their plasters?
I'd love to switch gears to that topic. My past is also in media, and so I had a similar
Hmm.
experience with you in radio and then transitioning into what became podcasting. I don't podcast now. I instead found my way to write rather extensively. And it's a wonderful example of what we're talking about because the radio stations and the
Mhm.
broadcasters that failed to make that digital transformation, for the most part, don't exist anymore,
Yes.
save for the local broadcasts. There are still local broadcasters, and you can find and pick up broadcasts as most of us do in our cars. But it's even more meaningful because too many folks who start podcasts or too many companies that try to participate in media meaningfully today are still 15 or 20 years behind in that they don't realize that a podcast, such as what we're doing here, is immediately accessible everywhere in every format. And so I find that most people who are trying to write like I do or podcast or stream like you do fail because they don't appreciate that the market changed and culture changed thanks to the internet in such a way that what digital transformation means is that your consumer or your audience is found absolutely everywhere now. We could be publishing this on LinkedIn. We could be publishing this on Spotify. We should be perhaps writing about it and producing it as well on Substack. Why? Because the consumer or your audience is the person who now determines or decides where they want to engage with you. It used to be that a company would maybe have a store location. They would send out a magazine that you could order from. You would have to call them to place that order. And the channels through which consumers and audiences engaged with the brand were very narrow and very limited. Those who fail today, because of this digital transformation that the world has gone through, those who fail today are the ones that think that things still work that way. That if you pick a channel, one channel, your preferred channel, maybe it's Facebook. If you pick Facebook and you think your audience will be there because you want them to be, and you will be able to sell there because that's where you want to sell, you're going to fail because your
Yeah.
customer is the one who gets to choose that I would like to be on Twitter and I'm not going to be on Facebook. And so if you neglect that, if you don't understand how to use platforms and infrastructure to reach your audience in many different meaningful ways, you're falling behind simply because you aren't taking advantage of the fact that the internet has made it possible for us to be accessible everywhere, rather affordably and rather easily. What was the name
This
of the
is
book? The Anticipatory Organization? I'm not familiar with the book, so I need to look it up.
yeah, is this the book? I will put the book down below in the comments.
Wonderful.
It's an intriguing book because it's showcasing how, if you are a disruptor and you anticipate the trends, you can lead the market. You were quoting Amazon. Amazon was looking at the trends of the cloud, because Amazon at the end was simply selling stuff on internet. But then you realize that all the data center that they had to power up their servers could be this data center that they were selling as well with the, at the beginning, Amazon Web Servers. And they were watching at the trends until the virtualization of the operating system moved from in-memory with VMware to on-chip on Intel, when in 2006, Intel released a new feature that finally, as IBM did 50 years ago with the mainframe, now you can virtualize your hardware natively. And so all the cloud transformation started with this trend, this simple invention. And Amazon, boom, anticipatory organization. We don't sell only stuff and books, we sell also the cloud. And this triggered all the disruption of Agile 2.0, that was the box, and all the infrastructure that you don't need anymore a data center on-prem. You can host stuff on cloud. And in Europe, you can imagine with our European community creating regulation to norma, the GDPR and all the stuff that in Europe we are really good with bureaucracy to chase this kind of digital disruption. So the book is intriguing, especially for us, looking at, are we able to see the trends so that we can help the entrepreneurs to create a company that is ready for what is coming? I call it the ice cream paradox.
The ice cream, explain that.
The ice cream paradox is simple. Everybody loves the Italian gelato, the ice cream. But if you go to sell the ice cream in Italy or in US or in the Sahara Desert, you will get tons of customers. Good. Let's go and sell the same ice cream on the Pole North or in Alaska or in the Antarctic. Nobody will purchase it. They don't care about the ice cream. It's so cold that who the hell cares about your ice cream? But the same people, if are relocated in Italy for a vacation, they will love it and they will eat kilograms of ice cream. So the paradox for me is that a lot of people, they don't see that what they do is triggering the outcome of their future. And as an incubator, a venture studio, an entrepreneur, we should look very careful to this, because the technology will change the social behavior of people. Internet did that at the end. Change our social behaviors from neighborhoods to social isolation, where the customer now is clustered in user personas. And so, as you said, you have the user persona that wants the media release on Facebook, on Twitter, on Instagram, or whatever. People that, because of political ideas, for instance, they don't like anymore X. They want something different. And this is what, in my opinion, a lot of companies, they are not able to correlate. They believe, I have my fantastic ice cream, and I will continue to sell the ice cream as it was before. The customer, the market is mine.
I'd even push harder. I'd even push much harder, frankly, on your point that that we should look closely at anticipating these changes. And what I mean by pushing harder is an important distinction between developing a new business or operating a business and what we accurately characterize as a startup. A startup works in the sector of our economy that means change. It means disruption.
By design.
If you're building something that already exists, even if it's new. If you're launching a new ice cream brand, if you're launching a new data server, if you're launching a new cloud service, those are classically not startups.
No.
And so your approach to them needs to be different because we can plan what they should be doing. We can put in place operations and process to ensure that they operate and run efficiently. And we need to be able to anticipate change because it's the changes that will disrupt or put those organizations out of business. Startups are what do that. Startups
Yes.
are distinct from those in that I want everyone to appreciate that you can't just look more closely at change if you are a startup or if you are an accelerator or an incubator or if you work in a corporate innovation program or a corporate venture program, that instead you must do so. You must do so. The inherent nature of what you're doing is the fact that things are changing. And if you're not bringing something to market that is distinctly different than what we do now, then the way that you go about that is different than the way that we go about developing things in the startup world. That, Michele, is probably the best way to understand and appreciate why most accelerators throughout the world have not been delivering good results. They operate more like, or they operate on behalf of business professionals and business expectations, which is fine in the context of a business incubator or a business development program.
Yes.
But when the accelerator presents itself as a program or a brand intended for entrepreneurship and innovation and startups, but it isn't operating that way, then the founders who come through the program, the founders who come through the curriculum, the founders who meet with the advisors there or connect with the investors there, those founders are more likely to fail. And that's what's been happening. They're more likely to fail because you're not operating something in a way that matters to the startup type of organization in particular.
I love where we are landing because this is the field that I love the most because it's behavioral engineering. And to me, an accelerator or an incubator that is creating a sort of cookie cutter organization generator with this is the process, follow it blindly, looks like an oxymoron. Because if the startup is designed to create disruption and we want to create disruption to a canonical process, how can we do that? So a disruption has to be something that is generated from thinking out of the box with a lot of critical thinking. And when I help investors to do advisory on tech, assessing how a tech company is, what I look with my team is an X-ray of the company, but as a social team. So how they behave as a social team. If they have the grit and the resilient and the reliability to go through the storm and succeed at the end of different quarters of struggle because they need to find their way to create a product that is clicking the customer to change the behavior. And then I start to look at their technology. Is their technology something that is a disruption? Is the application of the technology that is creating the different behavior in the customers and so a new market sector? So this is where I always understood that the accelerator or even the playbook of Agile, Scrum, Safe, whatsoever, they could be good for a corporation, good for beginners that they want to change their skin. But then if you do so, you need then to behave with somebody that has a really agile mindset or a real incubator that wants to create a disruptive startup. So you empower them with the basic of entrepreneurship. This is the basic governance, for instance, OKR, so that we can connect from board to the people working on the field. But then, guys, you are grown-up people. You have to find a way to create the market fit and the technology that will fit the market. So this is indeed what I am observing.
You
What do you
touched
think?
on a wonderful point that is important to appreciate when you said that you assess these organizations to help them figure out whether or not they can weather the storms. That the key distinction that's applicable here is that when we're operating a business, there are certainly storms, right? There could be a downturn in the economy. There could be something that disrupts our business. There could
Yeah,
be
a
a
COVID, for
competitor
instance.
or a copy, right? Those storms, though, are well known. We understand what's causing those storms. We understand how to survive them, lower your costs, maybe unfortunately lay off some employees and get through the
Yes.
difficult times until you can develop more business. But in a startup, it's important to appreciate that we're not likely to know what causes those storms. And so we're looking for personality types, which I referred to, personality types, which again, the research shows that there are certain types of people, there are certain personality types that will be successful in startups. Why would that be the case? Isn't it about experience and skills? No, unfortunately, it's actually not
No.
because the level of effort and the risk tolerance, the emotional intelligence, and the ability to think outside the box is completely different in a startup than operating a business. And so when we're talking about accelerators, when we're talking about incubators, and I think they're different things, when we're talking about these startup development organizations, we have to embrace the fact that what they really need to be doing is reducing the risks as much as possible for the entrepreneurs coming through the program, because the entrepreneur is already attuned to, given who they are, they're already attuned to weathering those storms, to not making enough money, to trying something and it fails, to launching in a one channel and no one engages with them, no one buys from them. So they have to try something else. They're already oriented to working that way. And so what the program needs to be doing, and where I work as well with cities and governments, is reducing the barriers, reducing the hurdles and the difficulties. We know, for example, that 90% of startups fail. Everyone's heard that conventional wisdom. Well, how many people have you ever heard ask, why can't we make it 80%? Can we just reduce the number that fail? Because it's a lot easier to make it easier for entrepreneurs than it is to ensure your success, right? If you come to me for office hours or you come to me for some mentorship, I have a habit of always saying, I don't know if my advice is any good. I don't know if this is correct, but here's what I think. And I do that because working in startups, we don't have the right answers. I can't guarantee you're going to be successful. I can't turn 10% success into 15% success. But what we can do is we can eliminate and avoid a lot of the regulation or the bad decisions or the things that have been tried before and failed. We can eliminate things for you. And that's what accelerators and incubators should be doing, so that instead of 90% failing, only 80% or 75% fail. And imagine, even though that's still a substantial number of failures, that's twice as much success. Imagine what that does to your local economy. Imagine what that
Yep.
does to economic impact and to job growth. If you can simply create twice as many things that are successful, instead of trying to chase the success, you look at what causes the failure and you try to get it out of the way.
I love it. And I will bring an example. So, with a failure rate of 90%, in the last century, we move from a society that was moving around with the horses to a society today that you can fly from Europe to US in a few hours, that we can have this podcast on real time, you in the US and me in Europe, and that we have technology that 100 years ago, we even were not able to imagine them. We have a sociological improvement in the technology that moves the needle of population worldwide from 1 billion to almost 10. And this is in a scenario where 90% of these organizations were failing and are failing. And most probably, if we don't do nothing to cross correct it, we'll still continue to fail. So if we reduce this from 90 to 80, increasing the success ratio of new technology of 200%, we can imagine how faster we can go in the upcoming 2 decades.
It's a perfect example because most incubators and accelerators are developed and run and managed locally. And you just illuminated why that is one of the challenges that we should overcome. And that challenge is that most programs then only have local mentors, local investors, and the local community. That we've gone from a company being able to access 100,000 or 1 million potential customers to hundreds of millions to a billion people throughout the world, thanks to the internet, thanks to our access and podcasting like this. We have infrastructure that enables us to connect with everyone everywhere. And and so imagine you're a founder coming through a program in your city. And in your city, I can only meet with the 10 local mentors who happen to work in, say, healthcare, health tech or biotech. But I'm trying to build a new MediaTech company, a new podcasting platform. And those 10 mentors, they're great startup professionals. They have startup experience. They know what they're doing. But the reality is they work in healthcare, and that's a completely different sector of the economy than the media industry. That one of the ways that we're seeing incubators and accelerators evolve meaningfully, I've criticized them quite a bit, but rest assured we're starting to figure out how to fix them, is why I got involved in Founder Institute. And that's that we can put infrastructure in place that gives people access to everyone everywhere. So instead of being limited to a certain community, you actually have access to a global network of the right people. And that's where our conversation or my article about venture studios emerged. That when we start to appreciate that there is value in things being sector specific, instead of every startup or all tech in an accelerator, right? That we have 10 healthcare, 10 health tech, biotech mentors in this local program. Why aren't we focusing that local program then on that sector in particular, instead of trying to make it accessible to everyone? Why not focus what they're doing and then also enable a group of media-oriented startup professionals to provide something similar in your community? That when we see an incubator or an accelerator or a venture studio, which is a different business model entirely that I think we're going to talk about, when we see that they're sector specific instead of the startup hub or the innovation hub or the tech center for everything, we see that the outcomes are much better because you have then in place the curriculum and the mentors and the advisors and the investors who know that sector in particular, as opposed to a lot of people who likely can't help, but want to, right? They want to, which means they're going to try to help. And the problem is your healthcare advice on my podcast infrastructure startup is probably wrong. It's helpful in the context of what we do with startups, but it's still probably wrong because we work in completely different sectors of the economy.
Could be an amazing discussion if the podcast is working and I have an audience that is a chiropractic or physiotherapist.
Well, that's
I
true.
think the commencement
That's true in the sense that we also know one of the most significant revolutions that we're still experiencing is one that we have already experienced in other sectors, and it is podcasting. It's the fact that you can now teleconference with your healthcare provider. We're seeing 10 years too late or 10 years after other sectors, the healthcare industry is finally catching on to the fact that we could use technology, we can use the internet, we can go through a digital transformation in a meaningful way. Ironically, or coincidentally, since it's the work I do, that's a good example of how and why regulation and public policy needs to change or needs to understand innovation and entrepreneurship, because the healthcare sector is a good example of where we're actually a decade or two behind almost everything else because regulation and policy is preventing entrepreneurs and innovators from making real change and meaningful improvements to what we're doing.
And so let me try to converge two topics now. Now I try to do a double backflip here. Will be the world eventually able to understand that the globalization is a phenomenon that paired with AI, so the ability to finally talk in your native language without any barrier, an enabler to create an ecosystem around the world where incubator, accelerator, venture studio will finally be able to empower local entrepreneurs, but in a network, in a community that is global.
It is two questions that I'm hearing. So good job with the double backflip. Can we put in place globalization and networks and this infrastructure that enables that? And is there an implication or impact thanks to AI? The answer to both questions is absolutely yes. The implication thanks to AI is still being realized, but I'm seeing some great examples such as AI infrastructure that assesses the nature of the team, not just the skills and the experience of the team, but the personality types that I was referring to help the founders or help the team identify not just if they need a head of sales or a head of business development, but that they need a introvert who is fixated with data and analytics. We're seeing AI expose more insight to how to more effectively put in place the right things. And so the accelerator space and the incubator space can absolutely take advantage of that too, right? What happens typically in an incubator is you're helping teach people or you're developing some IP or some research. What happens in an accelerator, hopefully, is that you're starting to focus on scale and growth and sales and partnership and funding, right? You're accelerating a thing that exists versus developing a new opportunity, be that a person or an idea. And so you can imagine how artificial intelligence in either case can help translate the curriculum or the research into meaningful application or relevant application that's unique to the person or the team. Or you can imagine how an accelerator could more quickly assess all of the investors who might be interested in what you're doing and present to you not just the spreadsheet, which you see on LinkedIn a lot. You see these spreadsheets of here are all of the investors for
Yeah,
a certain sector.
yeah.
That's helpful, but it's not terribly helpful because they're not that hard to find. AI can make it possible to understand exactly what those investors like, what they tend to invest in, whether or not they're investing now. And and it could give you a prioritized and rank ordered list of these are the folks that you should talk to first to get some feedback, not necessarily raise capital yet, but get some feedback. And then these are the folks that you want to focus on prioritizing to put forth your ask. These are the people who you really want to talk to about investing in what you're doing. Founders who are tuned into the show appreciate how incredible that technology would be because I know you all still struggle to just find investors. AI is going to take us well beyond just finding investors to finding the right kind of people and helping you understand how and when to engage on with them depending on what they do and what their interests are.
It's beautiful how you started and you end with a topic in behavioral engineering that is the social chemistry. So you were saying about the introvert, and then that AI can help you to connect with the right people. So this is what is the concept of social chemistry, where you need to tune you in a social network where people are with the same belief, with the same behaviors, with the same values and principles. And this is amazing because opens for me the Pandora box with the larger majority of private equity and venture capital activity. Because at the end, what I'm observing, so no data, observation of an old man with the white beard preparing to become the Christmas delivery guy. So what I am observing is a lot of investors are looking at is your idea a good one? Why? If we are market disruptor, it's probably too early stage to understand if my idea is a good one. Let's see if we can find a score to understand if my idea can potentially create disruption that can generate a tsunami in the market. And this is something that for me is funny to observe that a lot of frameworks, they are looking at, is your pitch a good one? Okay. Then let's move on to the second chapter that I observe. I observe them looking at the team, but in an emotional way. So they don't have a rigorous framework that is catalog the behavioral traits of the people in the team. There is one guy, Jordan Peterson, that I love a lot, and is looking and talking very often about the 5 archetypes of the big fives. So there are 5 components that are combining your personality, and you need to have the right ingredients in the team to balance them. You cannot put the narcissist in a team of people that are introvert, because then you have created the emperor and the slaves. So there are all these kind of discussion that a lot of investors, they are not doing in a, I don't want to say professional way, let's say scientific way. I guess it's more fair. And then there is the third item that I don't see almost anybody doing, especially in software, that is assessing what they have so far. So if we are in an incubator or in an accelerator, we know that what they have is more probably only ideas or prototypes. But then when we start to move from pre-seed to a Series A, you start to have assets, let's call them assets for the moment, that are more prone to get assessed. And I don't see, for some strange reason that I want to understand better with you, why a lot of these acquisition, when you are going through a funding, raising funds, they are not able to put the hands on which is the asset that we are purchasing. Because if it is software, as a software engineer, I would love to fund you if your software has some engineering mastery into what I'm purchasing or founding, because I know that this will be the vector to become a disruptor or becoming something that is a normal product that in a few years it will arrive to plateau because the technical depth is so big that you cannot evolve and scale anymore. So, yeah, go ahead. I put too many concepts on the table.
I would touch on one of those concepts in particular, and it's another glimpse into what the research has been showing about what we've gotten wrong about entrepreneurship and innovation, and why venture capital doesn't show up, and why incubators and accelerators can fail. And it's that you pointed out that many investors assess whether or not it's a good idea. I'm 50 as well. I've been around quite a bit. I assure you that if I have ideas, they're good ideas. That what we look to is not whether or not the idea is any good. The ideas are good. But the problem that we have in perpetuating idea validation, right? This concept of idea validation, validate the idea. The problem that we have in doing that is we're teaching entrepreneurs that they need to prove that there's a good idea there. And we're teaching the investors and the advisors that you should be validating whether or not there's a good idea there. Well, the thing is, it's a startup. The question is not whether or not it's a good idea. The question is actually whether or not the team can be successful, whether or not the market will allow them to be, or if there's regulation or competition that will prevent it, whether or not there is an opportunity for them to grow and scale. And those questions actually have nothing to do with the idea.
Exactly.
I like to point out that anybody who asks for validation of your idea or proof of your idea or traction about your idea, you need to remove from your peer group. You need to remove from your circle, because they're not being helpful to you. The challenge that you have is not whether or not an idea or the idea is good. The challenge you have is whether or not you can try many ideas constantly, different ideas, since most of those ideas, with regard to what technology stack do you use? Where do you develop your audience? Do I need a head of sales or a head of marketing on my team? These are all different ideas. We don't know which one of them is correct. As I pointed out, we can't tell you which is right. They're all just ideas. And you, as a founder, or you as an incubator or accelerator, need to be helping iterate and try those ideas as quickly and efficiently as possible, since most of them will fail. No, we didn't need a head of sales. We actually needed a head of marketing. Shoot. Now what, right? Or we built in React and that was a bad decision. Well, you need to be able to pivot quickly. Those are the storms that come. Those are the reasons that entrepreneurial people and certain personality types are more capable of success in startups because they can weather those kind of storms. They're predisposed to thinking that way, to discarding something very quickly when it doesn't work and trying something else. The incubator, the accelerator, your city, your local government, they need to be removing anything that prevents or hinders those entrepreneurs from doing that. And unfortunately, too many programs and too many ecosystems, in fact, put in place hurdles. They put in place barriers because they expect things to work a certain way. And in this sector of the economy, they don't work a certain way. We can only make it easier for everybody to try to figure out what does work along the way.
I guess that this is the pivotal moment where we turn the page and we start the discussion about the venture studio, because what is emerging indeed are these limits, intrinsic limits of how the accelerator incubators, they behave so far. Something that we understood we can change, they can change. But the future, I totally agree with you, in my opinion, is on the shoulder of the venture studio. And for me, the venture studio is a kind of ecosystem. And indeed, our model is called the unicorns ecosystem for this reason. It's an ecosystem that has to integrate between legals and regulation about all the cultural framework and boundaries that you have where you have located the headquarters of your company, because this is also another stuff that a lot of people, they are completely missing in the picture. Then beside these boundaries, that is the canvas for me, there are typically the governance where a startup needs to be helped, because a lot of the entrepreneurs that I met in my life, they were kiddos almost. People with great ideas that they don't want to go to work for an employer because they believe that they can be the employer. But do they have the skills to be the employer? So we need to help them with a governance, with a kind of support, coaching, mentoring, tools to help them to embrace the right governance model for a company that is disrupted by design. And for me, is a bending of OKRs, but with a behavioral engineering source. Because again, we need to be disruptor, good. Let's put in frame a OKR framework that helps us to cross correct as fast as possible on weekly basis. But then are we able to cross correct, or intrinsic behavior are stopping us to do that? And this is the discussion that we were touching about the team behavior. Is the team ready to embrace and survive to the storm? So this is for me one component. The second component has to be the product. And the third is the technical mastery to build it. Because the product, we don't know if the product that we have in mind is a good pitch or is a good sales in the future. Because I saw a lot of amazing pitch, but at the end, the product never came to the market. Guess what? Probably because they weren't able to build it, because they didn't have the technical mastery to do so, or because they never find the market fit. And so these three components for me are the three pillars of the pyramid where is in top the ecosystem of a venture studio. Of course, there are multiple components as pillars of the pyramids, but these are the three main that are, for me, what is the core, is the nuclear power plant of a modern organization. With you, I would like to go ahead in this discussion because you are the master as well in the venture studios. So let's open the Pandora box.
I don't know if I'm the master of venture studios. I'm a classically trained marketing guy and an economist who's worked in startups forever. So my tendency is to study things to figure out what we should be doing or could be doing. That let's take a step back and clarify why you and I and everyone else, you all, should be considering venture studios much more. And I'm going to do that through the lens of the work that I do, which is where governments and venture capital investment has been going. For the last 10 or 15 years, like I shared, Most of that has been going into accelerators. Accelerator emerged as this very sexy term, frankly, that was easy to sell, I think, because if you call something an accelerator, it implies that you're going to be making everything bigger and more successful and and
And
and
faster.
so and faster. And that's not to say, just so we're clear, that's not to say that there aren't accelerators that are great. There actually are wonderful accelerators that do just that. The challenge is there are very, very few of them because the people, as you referred, and the behavior in there, it's a certain set of skills that are very rare in the economy. It's heavily focused on fundraising and marketing and sales and storytelling and PR. And not many people can actually do that very well, let alone within startups. And so in studying that, I learned to appreciate better that what we need are the other two words that we've been using, incubator and venture studio. And we do have a lot of incubators, and most people think of incubators usually as labs or facilities to develop IP. That's correct. But like I said at the start of our conversation, you should also think of an incubator as the development of people, because there's no reason we can't be developing people better to be entrepreneurs or to understand how to develop startups. And so I include in the idea of incubators anything that's a space where we're developing something new. Governments, you all, and investors, you should be shifting your money away from accelerators unless they're actually accelerating. And we could talk about separately, or we could add to the comments or discussion what that might look like. But you should be shifting your money to incubators because you can invest in the development of these spaces and this infrastructure and this curriculum to develop IP and teach people. That then begs the question, what is a venture studio and why a venture studio? Well, classically, a venture studio is more of an owner operator entity in which the people aren't just helping the startups, the people are developing the startups. You have a stake in the companies that are being developed, and you have a responsibility to either provide the software engineering and the development, or maybe a marketing team, or maybe a business development team, or you have an obligation to fund and provide the software stack, to provide GitHub or provide Salesforce. Why? So that the startups that don't have that experience or don't have that capital to pay for have it available to them through your venture studio. And so because of that, governments should also be shifting their capital to supporting venture studios because they're technically operating businesses. They're making money by serving other customers or clients. They're perhaps working on some startups from external sources as opposed to their own. That at the same time, they're developing their own, right? Michele in a venture studio would be building something that he wants to bring to market in his venture studio. And at the same time, he might have a couple of other founders who have joined the team or joined the organization to build their startup. And they're doing that because he's got the experience or the team or the infrastructure that they need to be successful. The reason it's meaningful to investors and the reason it's meaningful to my friends in policy is because you're allocating money to an operating entity instead, a business that's going to make money, but because venture studios are typically what we were talking about. They are sector specific. And so the people involved are spinning out technology, they're building startups, and they're helping startups that they're most likely to help, that they're most likely to understand most. That it could be a media venture studio, as we've talked about today. It could be a healthcare venture studio. And in being a healthcare venture studio, when that fintech opportunity comes your way, you're not likely to work with it. You're not likely to help with it unless it's fintech for healthcare, because it doesn't really fit in the scope of what you're experienced with. And so you can see how a policy maker, a legislator, your local government would be much more effective and meaningful allocating resources to a venture studio because your city or your state or your government or your country might be best suited to doing some things in healthcare and biotech, but not fintech. Then great. invest that in an incubator for health tech, invest that in a venture studio for health tech. And then only if there's an accelerator that can actually accelerate things, that actually knows how to grow and scale and bring capital and bring customers and bring partners, would you invest in that? What we really need to do is just better discern what these terms mean, because they actually mean something. Most accelerators are actually just co-working spaces. Most accelerators are sort of actually incubators. And the problem with our misusing the words is that we allocate capital and we allocate resources and we allocate people to the wrong things, because what it says it is isn't actually what it's doing. Government funding and investors should be paying a lot more attention to incubators and venture studios, because the impact of their work is actually developing something. And we want to make sure that we're being careful of, when we're supporting an accelerator, is it actually resulting in much bigger, faster outcomes for the stuff that's coming into it? And again, recognize that most things coming into an accelerator are not prepared to be there, and the accelerator is not delivering those outcomes.
I love where you made really clear that the venture studio needs to be sectorial, so that has to be focused, laser focused on a specific domain. Because it's one of the stuff that I saw as the key component of dysfunctional investments. So people that have a PE or VC history of portfolio in this sector, then they are catching opportunity on other sectors where they don't have any experience because it seems profitable. And to me, this looks like a gamble on the horses. So the venture studio and the model that I've developed since I was witnessing with my brother, the Ferrari F1 world, is fully tuned for software. I'm a software engineer, and the model of the venture studio that I have designed based on behavioral engineering is for software, especially for SaaS company or for whoever needs to create software in order to enrich their programs or their products. Like, for instance, now the electric vehicle conversion is not anymore a car, it's a computer on four wheels. And this is a leap for a traditional car manufacturer that requires a specific help in creating software in the right way. That is where almost all the holding that they are owning car manufacturers so far, they are failing miserably, postponing the deadline that they created by themselves, like in 2030, we will sell only electric vehicles. Good. Impossible, because they are not even able to build them in a way the customer, they are purchasing it. And so they are rolling back to, no, we will sell only plug-in hybrids for the moment. So these are market indicators for me that are amazing, because if we look at them with a data lens, and so we return at the beginning of our discussion, looking at the world through data, that can be scary for a lot of people. And others, they can use this data as weapon. So the weaponization of data against somebody else or something else. But if we look at analysts, these data are creating the awareness to help governments, especially, to create regulation that are helping the future to move from the 90% failure to 80, 70. For instance, in Europe, the European Commission is giving a lot of funding to companies that they have good ideas or good intentions. But funding per se is like providing your kids with too much money. The temptation to get addicted to something they should not touch is really near the corner. So shouldn't be better to create a world where money is given to people that they have the ideas and the social behaviors to create an impact, instead of providing to people that they have great marketing ability. What do you think about this? Because this is a peculiarity in Europe that probably is not the same in US. US is more
Right.
investor-led.
Yes. Yes, it's actually a great question, because in Europe or not, audience, wherever you are in the world, the point that I think you're making that matters is that you have to appreciate that the mistakes that we've made for the last 10 or 15 years that I keep referring to are effectively an allocation of capital to the wrong things. And they're an allocation of capital to the wrong things or in the wrong ways, which causes what to happen? It causes that capital to stop showing up, That one of the things that we have noticed in the US, thanks to this boom of accelerators that don't really deliver results, is that because the idea of an accelerator is sexy and appealing, all of the sponsors and the angel investors stepped up and supported them. So they would pull the capital from banks and law firms to sponsor and co-brand, and they would pull maybe some city money, and they would pull some angel investors who would show up. And the problem with that was, or is, things didn't work the way that they were expected to out of an accelerator. The implication of that is what matters. And then I'll get back to the point about Europe. The implication of that is what matters. The implication is not just then that the accelerator struggles, because the accelerator can't keep getting the financial support. It's that everything struggles. Everything struggles because there are 6 incubators in town, and the incubators now can't get any financial support because everyone's been left with the impression that it doesn't work because of the accelerator sucking everything into it. That we tried that, it didn't work. And so what we're finding in the US now is that every city is struggling to bring sponsors and capital sources back to the table because we've gone through 10 or 15 years of programs and accelerators in place that don't deliver results. Now, we could change that. And we can change that because, to be clear, we know how this stuff works. We can't guarantee success, but we know how things work. We know personality types. We know how startups tend to operate. We know how to validate a market. We know what it takes to do what is involved in building a startup. Therefore, we also know what is involved in what it takes to develop a good or healthy or effective startup ecosystem. That's much of what I do. That's much of what I write about. That's what I'd like to work with you all about. And that begs the question that you present about Europe. And you're right. Europe makes seed capital prolifically available through public sources. And your use of words, good intentions, that's a great use of word because on the surface of the EU or your country doing that, it seems like a good thing. And indeed, I'm sure a lot of entrepreneurs are happy because they got that funding. They got that grant. It seems like people are trying to help. The problem with that is, you're right. What they're doing is they tend to be funding ideas without the infrastructure and experience and programming in place for that idea to actually develop into something meaningful. Or they're allocating the money, and what that causes to happen is it shifts the mind of the founder from being disruptive and aggressive and focusing on scale to instead, well, look, I have €1 million to continue to develop my IP. Here's the problem that creates. Again, money allocated in the wrong ways to the wrong people. The problem that creates is the investors in the US that you refer to. The investors in the US expect from $1 million to be a lot further along than wonderfully developed IP. I expect at that point a lot of market adoption, a lot of understanding of the customer, and probably a business model or some revenue in place. But you're not there. You haven't gotten there because the grant and the public funding didn't expect that of you. We see that and we know that again. And I'm using the word know a lot because, again, we know a lot of things about what works. We know that this is a problem because we're constantly serving and trying to support entrepreneurs and startups from throughout Europe. They all want to launch in the US and get funding in the US and get customers in the US. And by and large, what we're finding with all of them is that they're actually not developed and prepared to be live in the United States, that they didn't develop something that's ready to go. And so we can't help them. What they have is wonderful technology, wonderful IP. We see this with Israel as well, for example. Exceptional technology, mind-blowing inventions. But they haven't figured out how to build a company. They haven't figured out scale. They haven't figured out growth because that early public funding put in place the wrong expectations. So what we're talking about, what Michele and I are talking about is Where public funding could or should be better allocated is to the things that know what to do with it more meaningfully. And that isn't just incubators or venture studios. It's also accelerators that actually work. And it also could be even some way of managing the funding through people that know what they're doing, as opposed to allocating it directly to startups. Because bless you all, I work with you, legislators and policymakers. You aren't likely the best people to decide whether or not an idea is a good opportunity. There are people in the market that can do that. And so one possibility would be allocating that capital instead to funds in some meaningful way, where you know that the people that are operating those funds know what they're doing with it and can do the proper due diligence and help the startups that they're supporting. Really just shift the capital to the right places. Because if you don't, you continue to do what I started by pointing out, which is you continue to fund things that don't work. And as you continue to fund things that don't work, eventually the money just dries up. And then we're all struggling and we're all stuck without help.
And this is leading me to the last point, that is AI is a black hole that is getting all the capital. And the problem that we are observing here is a problem that starts to be really tangible nowadays, because we have a lot of money that is routed to the wrong stuff. Because if we can say wrong, because if the data are 90% of startups are failing, means that something wrong is there in the way how we are creating and founding this organization. Due to this point of view, we can say that the capital is rooted in the wrong manner. But also, we start to see, due to the technological disruption of AI, that it seems from the latest data of the first 6 months of 2025, that 80% of the capital worldwide is used for AI project or funding. That this is mind-blowing to me, because we have capital that is rooted to the wrong people helping organization to succeed, and these people are routing this capital that they got to 80% of companies that are trying to do something with AI, when AI is still in the early stage of, let's say, infancy. And we have to remember that AI is a technology that is based on software, that is the engineering practice that is in the really infancy of engineering, because it's the unique practice that cannot be predictable with results upfront. And whatever other engineering practice like mechanic, electrotechnic, electronic, you know by design on the paper what will happen if something happen on your structure, on your cable. With software, no. To a point that when we purchase software, you have to agree to the terms and conditions that if the software doesn't perform, there is a bug. This was in the contract. So to me, we start to move too much money in a mixer that the possibility of success in the next year are even less than what we are facing today. Am I wrong?
I don't think you're wrong, but I would challenge you a little bit, only to help your audience and everyone paying attention appreciate really where we started the conversation, which is that you must follow trends. You must study the market. The startups that fail and the accelerators that fail are the ones that are doing what they want to because they think so. And they read lean startup. And so they believe that if they build an MVP first, because that's my solution to this problem in the market, and then if I just prove that I can get some customers, I have a successful startup. And that's absolutely not true. Absolutely not correct. That the market is what is determining how things change and what will or will not work. So let me push back just with this perspective. AI is unique in that if you look back on the last 7 or 10 years, we've also had many new trends that sucked up a lot of capital, right? That took a lot of the venture capital out of the market. Blockchain,
Yes.
cryptocurrency, NFTs. You know, you can go down this list of the things that were the next hot. Remember the metaverse? How many of you all built stuff in the metaverse? The metaverse was going to be Web 3.0. Well, those of us that do this kind of work knew that that wasn't going to be the case. I know that cryptocurrency isn't going to change everything. I know that the metaverse was never going to be ever where we all hang out and where we all build. And yet you had a lot of startups and you had a lot of investors claiming it and trying to make it so. The reason that happens is not exactly wrong. It's just it misunderstands what's going on. AI is unique in that AI actually will be changing everything. AI is effectively what we should be referring to as Web 3.0 or 4.0 or whatever number we're on. And what I mean by that is social media was the previous iteration of the internet that changed absolutely everything. The entire internet is now social.
Yes.
Before that was what? It was e-commerce. It wasn't Amazon, it was e-commerce. We made the internet commercial. What I'm referring to is the fact that there are stages of innovation and evolution where we actually do disrupt and change everything. The first one, loosely related to what we're talking about, is the internet itself. The internet changed everything. And then it became commerce, and then it became social, and now it will become intelligent. Okay?
Yes.
Artificial
Global
intelligence will change everything.
intelligence.
So I'm pushing back just a little bit because it's understandable if you appreciate the role of venture capital. Venture capital is actually not business investment. That's a bit of what we're talking about here. It's not meant for businesses. It's meant to fund R&D. It's meant to fund the research and the development of things in the economy and in the ecosystem that can become new technologies and disrupt the market. So it makes sense that in our recognizing that AI is going to change everything, we might as well put most of our capital there because the other stuff that we've been working on isn't going to work that way anymore, right? The difference is it did not make sense to put all of our money into cryptocurrency because cryptocurrency wasn't going to change anything. However, it is understandable that a lot of money went into cryptocurrency. The difference is understanding the implication of the impact something is going to have. We're now struggling through what is effectively still the early stage of artificial intelligence, which means most of it's going to fail. We're still figuring it out. We're still developing policy. That most of the capital that goes there is going to be lost because it's funding that research. It's funding those attempts to figure out what actually is going to work. That's why I'd end us on this note. That's why governments or communities, that's why instead of funding an accelerator, which probably doesn't understand AI very well yet, and almost more likely can't accelerate it very well because we're still in the stage where Gemini and Claude and ChatGPT run basically everything, right? So there aren't that many opportunities to accelerate something in AI yet. But instead, you could be funding and supporting an incubator that's working in collaboration with OpenAI, for example, and developing new ideas or teaching people about AI. You could be funding a venture studio where the team is investing in and building out infrastructure for artificial intelligence. And so they're able to also help other people do the same thing. That allocation of capital to the right places is not just about the right places, the right business models, or the right startups. It's also the right sectors of the economy based on the trends that we study in the market, right? Don't put it all in NFTs. That's a dumb idea because we know NFTs are not going to change everything and they probably won't be worth anything because you can copy them. But I guarantee you, I'm certain of this. And as an advisor, I almost never say anything with certainty. AI is going to change everything. It's going to be involved in everything. How? We don't know yet. We're not there yet. But so it does make sense that you could or should be investing in the right places, in trends that we know are going to be much more substantial. You have to have the right expectations of that, right? You have to expect that if you're investing in that stuff now, a lot of it's not going to work yet. That's the stage that it's at. And again, that's why we have startups and that's why we have entrepreneurial people that are better suited to startups because they're okay with things not working well. If you're trying to launch AI businesses, they're probably not going to succeed. They're probably not going to be very effective yet because it's all still changing so much that we're not at the stage of that trend that you would really think of that as a developed business opportunity or business market. Not yet. Obviously, it's going very fast. It may change completely again in the next 6 months or a year. That's why it's an exciting space for innovation. And that's why it's a great example of where we should be thinking about and appreciating how allocating things properly and developing better business models for helping startups is really critical in the world today.
And I love where we arrive because I love how you challenge it. And the point that I love the most is because at the end, we return to square zero, the wrong allocation of capital, helping government, investors, funds to understand that I will change everything. We create a global connection between people without the language barrier that we have today. And that AI is based on infrastructure and software that needs to be fostered as culture in the incubators and the venture studios. And so, for me, if there is something that I would love our listeners to get pack out and move home as the lesson learned of today's podcast, is that if you have found to invest, please invest with the people that can create the impact in generating the organization of the future. And the organization of the future are disruptive, will leverage AI, and to do so, they need to be able to create infrastructure that are costly effective and a software that is built as engineers, not as amateur, because this is what at the end seems is one of the biggest failures from the data that I have on creating SaaS companies. The inability to create software that is scalable.
Very well said. Very well said. Please reach out and connect with me with regard to questions or ideas or opportunities about this in the economy. We know how to do this. Obviously, Michele knows how to do this when it comes to software development and his focus. My work, again, is with regard to the ecosystem, the economy, your government, your policy, where capital should be allocated. And the best way to do that with me is to really just look up Startup Economist or give me a call at Founder Institute. And again, we know how to do this. What we need is appreciation that knowing how to do it doesn't guarantee outcomes. It guarantees much better results and much more success for the entrepreneurs in your ecosystem. We should start putting that in place much more.
I will put all the links to reach Paula down below in the description. Also, I will release in the second half of this week, when the podcast will be released, a deep dive. I need to understand with Paula if we are able to create a deep dive on forehands, because he's a master in writing. I'm not that good in writing. So who knows? For the moment we will release the podcast, we will have figured it out. But for sure, you will read from me and you will read from Paula about the deep dives on this podcast and all the consideration that will trigger from the feedbacks that please use the comments below. Paul, without further ado, I will really thank you for the lovely discussion. I enjoyed it a lot. It went longer than was expected.
I hope that's okay, everybody.
Probably we have enjoyed it. And guys, Paul, if you have anything else to close the interview, please go ahead.
Putting those links in the footer, in the comments makes perfect sense. All I could wrap up with is connect. And I will extend this offer. I will whip up a draft that we can explore about your part of the world and see if we can get that published, maybe in time for the podcast to go live. So we'll see if I can get something done in time. I love to do them. So if you have audience members, I'll leave you this. If you have audience members in other parts of the world and you would just like to do a deep dive on your ecosystem, drop that in the comments or however is appropriate to reach out to me or Michele. And I'd love to look at doing that with you. Okay. Cheers, everybody.
Good. Fantastic. Paul, thank you so much. Listener, Digital Warriors, see you in the next episode. See you next week. Bye.
Thanks for listening, and please remember to subscribe to the Forge of Unicorns to stay up to date with our latest episodes.